Well, go on YouTube, it's Sammy Mac. In this video, I'm going to play you guys the recording that I took of my plea mitigation when I was applying for the bar practice course. This plea is literally the very one that I used. When I set it all up, I had my GoPro set up on my desk. When they put me into the interview room, I just pressed go on the GoPro. I filmed the exact plea that I used for the interview process. So it is literally the plea mitigation that got me a place on the bar practice course. Madam, may I please check that you have a copy of the pre-sentencing report?
I do, thank you.
You'll be well aware of the sentencing guidelines, madam, which for this offence of assault occasioning actually bodily harm start at a low-level community order and range to 36 weeks of imprisonment. I will be seeking to establish why Mrs. Fields should be sentenced at the lower end of this range due to serious mitigating factors. Madam, Mrs. Field has no statutory aggravating factors. This incident is very much standalone. The only other aggravating factor that is relevant here is of a child being present. And this incident was not a case that involved an incident with a child present. It was a case that involved an incident in defence of the child present. And I would ask that you would consider that when you sentence Mrs. Field. Madam, I don't want to belittle the seriousness of assault, and I also don't want to belittle the harm that has come to Mr. Knott from this incident. However, this could have very easily ended with much more serious harm. I would ask that you consider the low level of harm that came to Mr. Knott, especially the fact that he did not need to visit hospital after this incident. Mrs. Field entered a guilty plea at the first opportunity available. I would ask that you take this into consideration and apply the 1/3 off Mrs. Field's sentence in accordance with section 73 of the Sentencing Code. At the time of the offence, Mrs. Fields was in a state of stress in relation to her health as she was waiting to get the results of the tests from the doctors. Had she been in a relaxed environment, it is unlikely that she would have reacted and behaved in this manner. This is her first offence, and it is certainly a one-off. It's completely out of character for Mrs. Fields, especially as looking after her son is of number one priority. Mrs. Fields is a single mother with a 2.5-year-old son. She stated in an interview with me that since her husband left when her son was 4 months old, it has been very difficult for her to cope. Mrs. Fields stated to me in an interview that Mr. Knott made rude comments to her and her son twice before this incident. Quote, "How awful to dress a young child like that, have you no sense? And I'm glad I've seen you. Your front garden is a disgrace. This is a nice area. We don't need people like you bringing it down." And on this occasion, I will quote what he said to her. "I'm not surprised to see you here. Presumably, you can't look after your kid any better than the rest of your house. They should take him away from you." Whilst I'm not condoning Mrs. Field's behaviour, I would ask that you consider the aggravation from Mr. Knott, because without it, it is unlikely that Mrs. Field would have responded the way she did. Madam, I am in agreement with the pre-sentence report which suggests 200 hours unpaid work on a community order. For Mrs. Field's circumstances, a custodial sentence would be disproportionate and would have incredibly destructive effects on the care of her son. Mrs. Field's financial situation is uncomfortable at best, therefore a community order would be most applicable. However, madam, I would ask that you take into consideration Mrs. Field's work and care routine and apply the order accordingly so that it would not disturb the life and care of her son. I would like to conclude my submissions with a suggestion of an additional requirement for Mrs. Field to make a written apology to Mr. Knott. Mrs. Field told me in an interview that she is not proud of what she did, but she's not sorry because she believes that he deserves it. She has also refused to consider enrolling on an anger management course alongside this demonstration of no remorse. Therefore, I believe it would be impactful to encourage Mrs. Fields to apologise with the intentions of deterring her from this behaviour in the future, and very potentially forcing her to undergo an anger management course. Madam, if the court has no further questions, that concludes my submissions. So that's my plea. I hope you enjoyed it. I just wanted to show you guys on this video, just literally show you the recording of my plea. And I'm going to do a bit of a breakdown and an example plea mitigation with the same facts and all that on episode 5 of this series. So stay tuned in. I'll probably do a breakdown of this video, talk about how it went, the behind the scenes. I'll probably explain the case, what was good, what was bad, and then I'll film a example plea. From Glasgow to Berlin, Sammy out.